Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Python Community News, the show that brings you the non-pippable news around the Python community. We are back after a week off. Sorry, I was at a conference doing stuff, but I'm one of your hosts, Jay.
I'm John.
And yeah, we've got. I was worried that we were going to have too much stuff, and I'm still kind of worried about that. But we'll at least tackle it as we got it. And why don't we just jump right in with the first topic, which is it's that time of year again, folks. Django has told us that we have a developer survey to fill out. And this survey, it happens every year. It's done in partnership with JetBrains. Last year they did this. It actually brought about some technical changes. It showed that people really love Redis, and because of that, Redis has some built-in support into Django 4. Uh, John, have you already done this survey yet?
I have not done the survey yet, but it is on my list. I try to do the surveys for Django, Python, um, conferences that I participate in as much as I can because these are one super important for um, you know groups like the Django Software Foundation or the team behind PyCon and the PSF, just to inform them as right. This is one of the best ways that they have to interact with the community and get some aggregate data about things that are important to them. But two, because it's your voice, I think, is louder than you might realize when you fill one of these out. Um, in I'm looking at the stats from 2021 for the Django developer survey, and there were over 7,000 Django users that filled this out, which is a pretty sizable group of people. But at the same time, right, there are a ton of Django users around the world. Right, this represents 140 countries. Um, Anytime that you're going to fill out a survey like this, uh, you're really speaking, probably for more than just yourself, right? This is not the Django community as a whole. This is self-selecting for the folks who are really engaged in stuff like surveys. So you can definitely have an opportunity to make your voice and your needs from the framework really heard here.
I feel like this is very much, and these surveys are very much in the spirit of like why we do the show, even, and how we do the show. It's not necessarily just our opinion or what we think is important. I guess part of my job in the day to day is talking with people, and I actually had uh, a great conversation with someone last week, I believe, where we talked for about an hour and a half about Django admin and all of the concerns that they had with Django admin. And I mean, that's great. But I also wonder, like, okay, if two people can get together and have that conversation, and in the end, only like the end result is some person has a conference talk, and then I wind up learning a lot about Django admin. I wonder, like, what happens when you bring things like that, attention like that, to the core contributors' eyes. And sometimes it is just that one person. I mean, we talk very openly about how many people elect PSF members, of like, hey, you've got, millions and millions, I think it's like hundreds of millions of people using Python, and like elections are handled by less than like a tenth of that, less than like 5% of that, I believe.
So the Python Software Foundation board election results for 2022 was 1,459 PSF voting members.
Out of millions of people, so less than 1%.
Certainly, yeah.
So when it comes to making these decisions, it does often come to the, I don't want to say the loudest people in the room, but the people who show up and voice their opinion. And I think these surveys, which they're not long, I've done mine. It didn't take much time at all. Uh, they wind up not just giving, demographic information about who's using Django, how they're using it, what industries are they using it, but it really is that moment of like every single core developer is going to read this. Every single person that is involved. I'm pretty sure everyone in DEFNA, the Django Events Foundation of North America, and some of the associated organizations around the world, they're going to be looking at these results. And that is going to heavily sway decisions that they make as a maintaining body for the next year and probably year plus.
Yeah, and I want to correct myself on that number. Actually, I misread that. That's the number of voting members of the PSF.
So that wasn't even
So
everybody that
that's how many
voted.
ballots were sent out. There were 578 votes cast.
Okay.
And I think you'll I don't have the DSF election numbers in front of me, but I think you'll find right we do as a community a much better job getting these sorts of surveys out there than we do voting. Right, there are right uh, almost 5 times as many people that filled out the Python JetBrains survey last year as there are that voted in the PSF board elections this year. And in order to really, uh, that's where I'm saying, you really can make your voice heard, right? These elections are, pretty close, and a handful of votes can really sway things.
Definitely. So yeah, if you haven't yet, go to the Django website and make sure you check out the blog or news and events, and you can find the survey up top. Moving on to the next topic, we have once again found a vulnerability, and when I say once again, I don't even mean like another vulnerability. We've actually just rediscovered a 15-year-old vulnerability. John, you brought this one to the table.
Yeah, so this is an interesting one. Like you said, this was rediscovered. This is a vulnerability in the Tarfile module. And what this um, kind of the long and short of it is that it allows for a maliciously crafted tar file to be extracted by the tar file module that can, with the right input, lead to code execution. So it's a pretty impactful thing. The blog post here, right, claims 350,000 plus projects that are potentially affected by this, and they also include uh, a real life proof of concept against an actually vulnerable project. So it's a serious thing, and the reason it was rediscovered rather than just discovered is that it was originally reported about 15 years ago and closed with a documentation fix. So the original fix was essentially, hey, if you're writing software around right this particular module, be sure to uh, be aware of this potential issue. And now 15 years later, there's more ongoing conversation about this after it's been shown that this is affected more in the wild, and also Python's a much bigger language than it was 15 years ago. Right? If you were to go and answer the question, how many projects does this affect? When this was originally discovered, one, you'd have a pretty hard time doing it. They used a bunch of GitHub search and kind of crawling through those data sets to figure out how many projects, how many open source projects were affected. And two, that number would be way smaller just by virtue of the fact that there were fewer Python projects at that time. And so the big kind of interesting outcome to this, to me, is that Right. Originally, it was closed with a documentation fix, and now there's ongoing discussion on the CPython GitHub issue that was ported from the old bug tracker of what do we do about this now, and how do we, do we need to do anything more than just document this issue because the implementation complies with the spec, right? So
Mm.
if your goal is to comply with the spec, that's a totally reasonable position to take. But I'm personally really glad to see that we're seeing people say, right, what else do we do here now, right? This affects more people. We're in a position, right? When I say we, I mean the folks maintaining CPython are in a position to really add more safeguards into the language to prevent uh, issues like this from really creeping up into end users' projects.
Yeah, this gives me like we're gonna talk about it later, but like that understanding of like it takes several groups of people all like and sometimes it might be spearheaded by someone who is very passionate about a particular topic or a particular like industry or focus or discipline. I know you and I have hinted about like, hey, we need to bring in like Dustin Ingram to come and talk about security stuff. Dustin, if you're listening, just DM me. You have my information already. So, but like just the ability to have people who are passionate about this, but also to give them space to like actively develop and actively look into these things. I know another good example is PSF board member Simon Willison, who has been doing a lot just looking at different exploits around like the GPT-3 like AI generated art and stuff and how that can be misused and abused not from a cultural or like legal standpoint but from like a technical vulnerability standpoint. And when you have these people, it's great, but sometimes they're occupied with life and like life just happening. So it's great to see that this came out of a research center. This came out of people whose job is to focus on discovering and finding these types of things. And I think that as Python continues to grow larger and larger in all of the spaces, I think that we're going to see not just new discoveries and new exploits and vulnerabilities, but we will see older, less, or I guess determined to be less impactful issues brought up again and again of like, oh, hey, you can use this thing in a way that no one was ever using it 20 years ago, and it could actually do some harm. Or, I mean, maybe it does some good. Maybe it benefits people. But ultimately, I think as the community grows, we're going to just rediscover more and more things. And honestly, that's kind of the beauty of open source development, is that people have the ability to do this and see them and see it happening in front of their eyes with full transparency. Speaking of full transparency, John, the Washington Post is doing something interesting. They are open sourcing their live election night model, which to me is very intriguing because we often, I mean, I don't know, the last I think we can say the last few elections have been contentious, I guess, to say anything about them. But it's always been interesting to me of like, how are they getting information, how are they bringing all this data in. And the reason we're telling you this in a Python community news podcast is that they actually switched their model from R to Python, which, John, you had a really good insight on that, so I'm gonna hand it over to you.
Yeah. So the reason that they lead with here is why did they switch their implementation to Python was to uh, partially aid deployment, right? Which is a deployment and packaging in Python has historically not been the kind of uh, fairy tale that we would all like it to be, right? It's a uh, it has often been a difficult thing to work around, and right has all of these different tool sets, and no real one right way to do it, and so it's interesting to see this this transition to Python specifically for that reason. But at the same time, right, um, you and I work in Python, and now we're able to go and look at this open source model and could contribute to it. And I think that's probably a big gain as well.
To me, I think the proliferation and kind of settling on like notebooks as a way to disseminate information, disseminate things like models, and provide feedback has been such a game changer for the Python community. I know that in my mind, I'm not the biggest Jupyter, notebooks person. I'm not, I mean, I'm a fan of them. I just don't use them all that often. But I hear from so many people in like the data community and the scientific community of like notebook or it didn't happen. Like that level of methodology, like, okay, we need to be able to create we need to be able to recreate the scenario, which is just good data science, good scientific, practice in general, and the ability to take fundamental models that anyone can use. I mean, I believe people in like CERN around like the Large Hadron Collider and things like that, and people in James Webb Space Telescope, and like all of these amazing things that we're doing in the science world and in the data world and the data modeling world, it can always be created at some form given the resources, um, or at least visible to people, and it only became easier once things like notebooks became more available. So yeah, like I don't know what ours, entire, package frame is for sharing of information, but I know that like Python has led the way for many years in terms of like Jupyter notebooks. I think if people who have been in the industry long enough, I think they used to be called like IPython notebooks. Um, so like they've been heavily integrated into the Python community for a long time now. And now that more and more industries are utilizing them, it just seems like it's becoming more and easier for other industries, including journalism, which actually I found out about another journalistic or journalism ish project that some folks at GitHub are working on. That's really cool. That's open source. But again, like I love to see this growth in different industries that we weren't thinking about, even if that includes maybe talking a little politics from time to time.
Yeah, I mean, so you mentioned Simon earlier. Simon's tool dataset, I think, is a uh, definitely in the same realm of right being able to ship, uh, more data than you might usually ship around right to each other to explore via SQLite and the other kind of tooling that has been built up on top of that. And certainly the more accessible these sorts of things are, the better.
I know we're not supposed to give people pippable things, but I mean another one is superset, like Apache superset. Just to me, just the idea of how do we make data easily accessible? How do we make it easily, you know, discoverable, downloadable, and applicable? And I don't have all of the knowledge in the world in that space. It is very much not my arena, but again, the more the merrier. The more ways, Hugging Face, the more things that allow anyone to go in and say, I want to look at data. One of my favorites is Socrata, which usually is where I go find, you know, public data, public civics data from city, state, and federal governments. And it's all available for free. And a lot of people don't know this. So I always use my time of, we're talking about data, Socrata, public data, things happening probably in your area that are accessible via API that you can look at and play with. Um, or, I mean, even define discoveries and sound that much smarter at the next city hall meeting. But like anything that you want to do with a lot of this data, it's often available to you via an open source license. You just have to know where it is and how to find it. And again, when the Washington Post makes it so much easier by open sourcing it, throwing it on GitHub, giving it a repo, adding notebooks, doing all those things, it just makes life better for everyone. Speaking of another change, we have another bit of news, this time from the folks at PyTorch. PyTorch is creating a foundation, and it's going to be bundled under the Linux Foundation, which, for those that don't know, Linux has been running under a Linux Foundation for several years, or certain parts of Linux have been running under a Linux Foundation for several years. Um, they have representatives from major companies around the world. Uh, Adding PyTorch to this, speaking of data science and the data community and machine learning and all these other things, uh, this this is to provide a lot of things, oversight, funding, um, active development. It also kind of removes it from under the like Meta umbrella, although Meta has made a statement that they're going to continue investing into PyTorch and still using it as their primary framework. But what do you think of PyTorch being moved under the Linux Foundation umbrella?
It's an interesting thing. I think that a lot of major projects make these kinds of changes, and it remains to be seen, I think, how that will affect the thing, right, long term. Um, Python has its Python Software Foundation. We've also talked about the DSF for Django, and independence, right, as a project can be pretty powerful, but it can also be difficult, right?
Mm,
Uh, you know, I'm time is a blur. I don't know how long Python has had a developer in residence, but only a few years now, right? So
yeah.
we're talking about a 30+ year old language that, right, is uh, saying it's volunteer driven is a bit of an overly broad statement, but right, the foundation hasn't been, right, the primary employer of people contributing to the language, right? And it'll be really interesting to see, right, how this goes forward, and right, the PSF and the DSF both have these kind of developer and residence roles, and we'll see how that kind of works out with PyTorch moving, right, to its own foundation, with the benefits of being under the umbrella of an existing foundation too, which, if you've ever been involved in right nonprofit kind of work, there's a lot of hoops to jump through with regards to, right, maintaining a foundation like that. So that layer of support, I think, will probably be super useful. But yeah, I'm really curious to see how it plays out long term. You know, uh, do you know of other projects that have made this kind of migration before?
I can't think of any that have like started under a company. I mean, I know NPM made a bunch of moves, but then got acquired, and like there's a lot that happens in that space. But in terms of a company kind of launching a thing and realizing, hey, it might be better governed, better managed if there's a dedicated team focused on this that's not just our company, that's, multiple companies, multiple players in the industry. I think the Linux Foundation is a great place to put this project. I don't think it needs to be. I mean, I definitely don't want to see like jazz band being like, "Hey, we're gonna maintain PyTorch now." That doesn't feel like a very healthy decision there. But uh, nor having it tied, to the PSF, because when I think of this, like I have this conversation with some colleagues probably once a week. The community of Python is not just web developers. They're not just automators. I mean, I just waxed poetic about this, 5 minutes ago. It's it's a wide array of people. And when you have a project that's this important, I think it's also important to have it governed by a wide array of industry leaders, be them companies, be them, people with experience. One of the biggest benefits of conferences that kind of go under the blanket of the PSF is they get access to legal representation. They get access to people who have put conferences together before, especially, which is super valuable for new conferences. So I think this being under an industry recognized foundation like the Linux Foundation means a sign of hope for much, or I guess for many years to come, for PyTorch. But yeah, I would actually like to see more organizations do this with bigger projects, or and I mean, unfortunately, it's kind of hard to do that. But I'm excited that Meta decided to make this decision.
Well, and since you brought it up, I'm gonna throw a recommendation out to, you know, we should fund jazz band more.
Yes.
Jazz band maintains a bunch of projects, and they're if you go to jazzband.co, you'll find a donate link that takes you to the Python Software Foundation donation page, and so you can definitely contribute financially to jazz band and make it so that this is not right something that is solely run by uncompensated volunteers, right? It's a big um, a pretty big issue when you've got these projects that are uh, powering millions of other projects, and maintained primarily by people in their spare time. And there are a whole bunch of different projects under the jazz band umbrella, so how active they are and how many people are involved is going to vary. But if our concern is right, um, let's make sure this project has a good place to go so that it's backed by the right people and in good financial standing. Uh, you know, uh, putting more sponsorship behind jazz band would be definitely a good option as well.
And I think that is kind of a secondary goal of this. I know when we were originally talking about this show, John, like it had, like, PSF elections had just happened. We saw the numbers and we were like, more people need to know about these things. Like it's not just pip install, it's pip install and maybe donate. I actually saw there was some chatter, and it was just chatter, so it won't be a topic, in the near future. But uh, folks were talking about how even with npm, the node packaging manager for javascript, you there is like a donate reference immediately in the actual like npm install. And I know that on PyPI, like if you actually go to the PyPI, I think they have a donate marker to where you can contribute to some of these packages. And you might ask, well, what for? If these are volunteers, or if this is free, why do I have to pay for it? And it's like, well, when there's support behind these things, it makes it better. URLlib, the most downloaded package on PyPI, most of the tools that interface with the internet that you use in your packages utilize URLlib. They actually started this year doing bug bounties. And the only way you can do that is if you have the funding to do that. The one of the core maintainers, Seth Larson, I'm sure he's not like coming out of his pocket like every time there's a new bug found. But again, like it is impossible to create the infrastructure, the oversight, the governance without people dedicated to these causes. And having a foundation isn't just a way to say like, oh well, now we're serious. No, Meta's been serious about PyTorch. Like PyTorch is a very, very popular module that deserves this level of oversight, this level of attention, because I don't know if you noticed, but like machine learning can go very bad very quickly. And there have to be very, very intelligent, very knowledgeable people in the room making very difficult decisions. And I mean, maybe Meta has the pockets to hire all of those people, but maybe those people don't want to work there. Maybe they would like what they're doing now. Maybe Meta can do it, but some other company that builds some big project, maybe they don't have the pockets deep enough to do that. So I think creating incentives for, again, having the right people in the room, providing their insight and knowledge in the industries that they're passionate about, and the people who make up, the oversight committees and the governing boards of the Linux Foundation are those people. I think the more that we contribute to the projects that matter most, and I'm not just talking to individual contributors, I'm talking to companies as well. So, you can clip this and send it to your boss and say we need to donate. Um, I think that makes for a safer, it makes for a better economy, and ultimately it makes for a better Python and a better Python ecosystem.
Speaking of better Python, Jay,
Better Python. What about faster Python?
faster can mean better.
Faster usually does mean better, and in this case, Python 3.11 is almost here. Python 3.11, the official release, is about a month away, which means RC2 is now out. And for those that don't know, RC2 means that as long as everything is good, as long as there are no critical bugs found, this is the version of Python that will be 3.11. The contributing team has said, if you are a package maintainer, it's our hope that you'll use this. Make sure that your packages are ready for 3.11 when they arrive, when it comes out next month. If you are developing platforms and ecosystems, like again, use this to test, find the bugs now, so that you can be ready to go in October. For those that don't know, Python 3.11, well, Python 3.10 was the first stage in some big performance enhancements. 3.11 adds to that. And we're going to talk about it in detail later, but like it's only going up from here. So you want to make sure that, if you have a package where people are complaining about performance, being 3.11 ready might mean that you have to do very little work to get some very big performance gains. But the only way you can do that is by messing with it and testing it out. So it's available for you to test. You can download it off of python.org. You can also find it in most Python version management tools. I know I have a copy of 11RC2 on my machine through um, now I can't remember what it's called, PyEnv, Py environment. But yeah, get out there and update your stuff. Get it ready to go. Get it out the door.
And report any bugs you find, right? I think
Yes.
this happened with 3.10. There was a, I want to say it was 3.10, but it could have been 3.9, 3.9, where there was a from future annotations change that was going to become the default behavior and got pushed back because of an error it introduced in Pydantic, right? And the earlier the CPython developers and release managers know about these things, the faster they can actually work with everybody involved to get a solution out there, because um, you'll see, right, especially the further you get kind of away from the right, using it as a dependency rather than right, this is a project that I'm running. People wait longer and longer to test, right? And so you'll find a lot of people will say things like, okay, well, 3.11 is out and now I'll try an upgrade. But you can one, make that less of a surprise for yourself when you try and test it earlier rather than later, and two, raise those issues that you find with the CPython bug tracker.
And just piggybacking on that, I mean, it was in the last episode that we talked about, critical, vulnerabilities being patched, you know, quickly across multiple versions. So like when you see something, it's I still feel like it's great that we're able to release updates like kind of, I don't want to say out of cycle or out of band, but faster than before. You don't have to wait a year to get those security updates added, and I don't think it's really ever been like that. But if they can fix it before it goes mainstream, before your different providers that you're using, your any of the major tools that you have, if you can prevent those from happening, that's great. I mean, I worked at a company before that when the Java bug happened, again, it's one of those things that just kind of sat there for a long time, and then someone figured out how to use it, and someone figured out how to like take advantage of it, and then it became like the biggest security vulnerability of the year. And it also happened right around Christmas time where people were off. I don't know if you've checked your calendars or not, but we're getting closer and closer to the end of the year, which means lots of vacation times start happening, lots of things start happening. You don't want to wait until New Year's Eve to have like that mission critical bug that everyone has to fix and people start scrambling. So like the the sooner we find vulnerabilities, the sooner we find, breaking changes and things like that, the better, and the faster that we can get that information out to all the maintainers and developers, and we can get updates out. But I mentioned before, John, that this was just the beginning of some of those big performance improvements. Um, there's actually a lot of performance improvements happening, and there is a lot of stuff. And as I see per interpreter Gil at the top, I think people who are Gil fans are like, yeah, Gil. And some people who are like JIT fans like, wait for the JIT. But like whatever, there's a whole bunch of conversations happening around what can be done to remove the I guess the black sheep conversation around Python in terms of being slow. So this was released by Guido van Rossum from the Faster C Python team, also creator of Python. I'm gonna just say that as like an aside. I feel like that's how he would prefer it. But 311, like I said, is kind of just a continuation of a larger project that uh, being spearheaded by some folks across many companies, primarily Microsoft. They have a team called the Faster C Python team. And this team is led by Guido, a few others. I actually had the benefit of being able to talk with this team before, so there's a lot of really cool stuff coming out of it. And they all kind of said the same thing in most of the conversation. 311 was basically done when we started. Now we're working on 312. And they've outlined a lot of those things that are going to be coming out. John, was there anything in here in particular that kind of popped out to you?
Yeah, I mean there are some super interesting technical changes happening here. Right, having a per interpreter GIL is definitely a big one. And then I think there were multiple interpreters um, within um, within the same process. Plus, right, faster garbage collection. So I don't know that we have a ton of kind of specifics to dive into here without getting far more technical in the show than we really want to. But I think there's a more kind of broader conversation going on around here about like the team is called faster C Python, right? It's a really common feedback you hear is Python slow, and right that is a pretty loaded statement all on its own. But seeing plans like this to kind of tackle those sorts of issues makes for a much healthier kind of place in the development ecosystem long term, right? Because Python is slow has been a trope for a very long time. Um, and the more we can do to kind of knock down that performance overhead you might have against other languages, the easier it is to choose Python for a new project.
Yeah, the trope of Python being slow has always been one that like aggravates me, but we're not going to go down that road. Um, I often tell people a programming language is like a car. Most of them will get you from point A to point B. Some will get you there faster, but also, uh, I probably shouldn't be driving a Bugatti everywhere. It just doesn't make sense to do so. Um, but I do love that we can look at impact in the Python community extending beyond just speed with a lot of these things. I know before the show John and I were going back and forth on kind of a conversation on environmental impact and other things, and it's like we don't know yet. But what we do know is that if it's faster, if it's more efficient, that means things don't have to be sitting there waiting. I actually have created projects before where like I had to have a server constantly running because of the like spin up time that it took to get things going. And then also the time it took to process things. I would like pull data down and let it run overnight and it would take hours. And part of that was inefficient Python code, but the other part of that was just kind of that's the process when you're dealing with a lot of data and you got to go through it. And at the time asynchronous Python wasn't a big thing for me to do, or multi-threaded Python wasn't a big thing for me to do. Like, it just took longer. So now we're able to start working towards one, faster performance in single threaded environments, not just, oh well, just throw async on everything and that solves your problem. Now it's like, no, even in your often untouched code, things will be significantly faster. Our website generates significantly faster after, well, at least my website did, after moving from 3.9 to 3.10. And I can't wait for 3.11 because, 18 seconds to 4 maybe to 1. And like that's exciting for me, but for a multitude of reasons, one of those being I wonder what potential improvements, not just towards like overall my code runs faster, but also spin up and tear down time of a lot of these larger projects.
Yeah, I think there was a proposal that I don't believe is covered in this document, but around improving the performance of imports as well, which is a uh, big thing related to writing things like CLI tools in Python, right? And um, there will be times, right, when you're developing a tool and someone will say, well, we shouldn't do that in Python because it's going to take too long for the CLI to start. And my feedback is often that that's not a realistic um, uh, objection to raise for a little internal tool. Like, I want to write a thing that somebody on the team is going to run once a week. But uh, but yeah, I mean, knocking down those sorts of blockers to well, now we need to um, consider these other languages because we have a concern around the startup time of this process, for example. Um, those are going to be really impactful things.
And I mean, again, here we'll go to us on this because I feel like this is gonna get fun. Um, One of the things that I've been on board with too is seeing how the introduction of more performant languages makes for new ideas. I look at what, Will McGugan is doing with like rich and textual, and I'm like, oh, cool. Like building interfaces that allow you to dynamically work inside of a terminal and put buttons and things like that. Like that's cool that we're able to do that. But then I see like Rust over in the corner where everyone being like, "Oh yeah, you should just replace everything with the Rust alternative because it makes things run faster." And it's like, yeah, but I also see people that take that to the extreme and they're just like, "Well, you really just shouldn't be developing anything in C anymore. It should just be Rust." And there's a part of me that like looks at that, with some side eye and being like, okay, that's kind of silly. But then also, why can't we have that same conversation about Python? And I mean, ultimately, again, it's that performance question of like, sure, your script may run in 5 milliseconds. That's great, but when you're trying to like index your file system or create a navigation walker and things like that, yeah, you start to feel the pain of having to work with millions of files and or work with pulling down data or just moving data or even just the idea of processing it. I mean, we've all had some Excel spreadsheet that we used, some form of automation tool to speed up because why doing it the old fashioned way just feels slow after a while. So like, do you think that these overall improvements, which you know, to be clear, 312 isn't the end. They're going to be conversations for the near future. One of the fun things about this is that this prolongs the need for people calling for Python 4. Nobody wants that war. Nobody wants that to happen. We're not there yet. But, do you think that if we continue to see improvements that one Python will continue to ascend this multi-disciplinary like ecosystem that it's built and maybe move into like things that you just traditionally didn't do with Python. Now you do it with Python not because it's quote unquote the fastest, but it's just the easiest and it's fast enough.
Yeah, and so you bring up this conversation of, right, Python versus Rust, right? This isn't it's not a competition between these two languages, right? It's
Yep.
not one, it's both. And I think these sorts of changes that we're going to see in 312 and beyond, right, are the changes that make the need for reaching for Rust uh, as right an implementation with Python bindings, for example, um, we push that need down the line a little bit,
Yeah.
and uh, Python is as popular as it is for really good reason. It's a very approachable language, right? It's there's a reason it's used in a lot of education scenarios, uh, and I don't think that, right. Oh, Rust is so much faster, or you know, pick another arbitrary language that's going to be so much faster is gonna change any of that, right?
Yeah.
People are going to be really effective using Python, because one, there's an enormous community there that exists to help each other out and build uh, you know all sorts of great open source tooling that, right, if you can think of it, somebody's done it in Python. um, and uh, with that, you gain the ability to right, pick and choose those components that are like, well, this particular thing is slow, and we need to be faster. And I think it is the cryptography library a while back switched over to a Rust implementation, and and that I think is gonna be what we'll see more and more of, is right, these sort of common, very performance oriented uh, use cases that are used across the board in all sorts of other projects. Will get that sort of, right, implement the thing in Rust, give it Python bindings treatment. But for everything else, for right, like my quick, I need to write a script to transform a bunch of data that's in a Google spreadsheet into a static site generators format. Right, I do that with a 10 or 20 line Python script. I'm probably not going to learn Rust to make that process faster. Right,
And if you want to, Rust Python is a thing, and you can check
absolutely.
that out on your own time. No, I get what you're saying, and I agree with you. I do wonder about some of the traditional platforms that went the C route because of performance. I think NumPy is one. I know that I believe Pillow also, like, there's a lot of stuff that's just happening underneath that isn't necessarily Python touchable, and it's not. I think that faster Python means that less and less things have to reach out, which kind of brings up the second part of this, which is the ability for more people to focus on this. When you're hiring somebody and it's like, okay, you really care about this thing, but everything we've had to do in C, or we've had to do in this other language because it just doesn't reach the performance metrics that we want. Now there can be pushback of, okay, let's get our tooling up to date. Let's get on the latest versions of Python, and let's take advantage of some of these performance increases, because nothing, um, as someone who has had to write code that was in both like Python and then in like another language, nothing throws off productivity from having to think in two separate languages to accomplish one task. I do think that we'll see things that were traditionally reserved for some of those faster models at least examined, of like, okay, can we do this now in Python? And if not in 3.12, what about 3.13? What about 3.14? I mean, not me saying this, not anybody in particular saying this, but the hope is that we see continuous 20 to 60% increase in like performance with each iteration. Like, it's that's kind of the goal with this project of the faster C Python team. Is it's not like one big hit and all of a sudden everything is faster. It's like, oh no, this is going to be faster, and then the next version is going to be even faster, and the next version is going to be way too fast. um, I look forward to what the ecosystem looks like 3 years from now, because I know what how much it's changed just in the 7-8 years of doing Python till today.
Well, Jay, I think we have a bunch more stuff I wish we could cover, but we are running pretty short on time this week. I do think we have a conference to talk about.
Yeah, we talked about this conference before, but they recently just extended their CFP, and I have a link here. I need to go to it. PyJamas, one of my favorite conferences, their CFP is now extended to October 3rd. So you have another week to get your information, get your CFP submitted. If you're not familiar with the PyJamas theme, uh, it's the only conference where you were encouraged to give a talk in pajamas. At least the only Python conference that I know of that does that. The talks are usually very fun, very lighthearted, and I believe they're only like 15 minutes long. So it's a great conference for your first talk. It's a great conference for maybe that person who's given talks for a long time, but it's it's near and dear to my heart because it's one of my favorite conferences to go to because I literally roll out of bed, like turn on a webcam, give my talk, and then roll right back into bed. And that's encouraged. That's kind of the only conference news we have, and you may be saying to yourself, "Hey, what about this other conference?" Well, we didn't catch it. And that's why we rely on you, the community, to help us find these things. In fact, our entire show is compiled not just by John and I, but from other folks in the community. Again, I keep warning, this link will change eventually, but it still works for now. It'll probably work in the future, even if the link changes. This link will still work. But it's github.com/KJY Miller /Python community news. Uh, Go to the issue section, create a new issue. There will be some templates that you can follow to submit a new topic or to submit a new conference. Maybe you're putting on a new conference, or maybe your CFP just opened up and you want to let people know about it. That is the place to do it. This show goes out not just on YouTube. Shout out to all the people watching live, but also on python-community-news.com, as well as in podcast, newsletter, and brief form where we give you just the news, less opinion, just the facts. But yeah, I think that's gonna wrap it up for this week. John, did we miss anything?
I'm sure we missed plenty.
Well, if we did, it'll be in the brief.
We'll cover that in the brief, and we have a pretty exciting episode coming next week. So hoping to see people tune in then.
Yes, actually, I thought I had a bumper or a little banner for this, but apparently I overrode it. Next week, we will actually be live on Wednesday with a special guest here to talk about one of the open source community's favorite times of the year, Hacktoberfest. You're not going to want to miss it. There's going to be great advice on how to get started. And we actually have some of the organizing team that will be live with us to let us know all there is to know about this year's version of Hacktoberfest. That's going to be next Wednesday. We will be tweeting out about it. I think it's going to be a little bit later than our usual time, but not too much later. Be on the lookout for news around that on both of our Twitters. Mine's at KJY Miller, John's at Jonafato. I think that's going to wrap it up for this episode.
All right, thanks to everybody who joined, and to all our listeners.
Yep, and until next time, I'm Jay Miller.
I'm Jon Banafato.
And this has been the Python Community News.